So we're going to start off with a rather easy question.
Good.
Let's say you win on November 8th. When you walk into the Senate chambers, what are the three most important issues to you?
You know, it's been crime, corruption, and economic development. If I can get those three elements going and working on modifying some of those issues, I think that would be a good start. But I'll be nervous, that's for sure. But those are the issues that I really am pushing hard on.
And why those issues?
You know, which we may talk about later, but the crime, it's been increasing here lately, not just in the Quad Cities and not just in my district, but across the U.S. And we need to work on, I'll call it reforming. And the state of Illinois tried to do some reforming, but I think went too far with the Safety Act. There's no cash bail. And I think that's going to increase crime. And talking to law enforcement, they're very concerned about it. Talking to the state's attorneys, they're concerned about it. And so we need to either reform that again, but people deserve to live in a safe place and feel like they can walk down any street in the city and feel comfortable and not have to worry about issues. And so that's with the crime. The corruption, we've seen a number of people, and I guess naming names, Mike Madigan is one in leadership for 40 years, 22 federal indictments against him. There was 2 other senators that just were indicted. We need to work on corruption within the legislation, within the elected officials, and make sure that people are getting fair representation and it's not slighted one way or the other or special interests. So that needs to be worked on. And then there's a crime for those. There's a punishment for that type of an act. And then economic development. We need to continue to build our way, or not to continue, but start building our way out of this financial situation the state's in versus buying our way. Too many people are leaving the state of Illinois. We just see that Tyson's left and Caterpillar's left and Boeing left. Thousands of employees are leaving and people are leaving the state. 100,000 people left last year. And we can't keep on spending more money and having to increase fees and taxes to the people that are left here. They're getting he's getting carried away on the taxes and fees that are being charged. People are running to other states. Go to buy gas. I couldn't tell you how many people I talked to that are run over to the Iowa side to buy gas because it's 60 cents a gallon cheaper. And we have a lot of taxes on gas.
Well, let's turn to crime. Illinois has passed the Safety Act, which among widespread issues, it is a criminal justice reform law. You've been outspoken against it. Explain your reasoning why.
Well, this safety bill, once again, talks, there's no cash bail. Historically, most crimes are committed with people that are doing second and third offenses. We need to make sure they stay behind jail, stay in jail, stay behind the bars. So to protect the victims, how would you like to be a victim of kidnapping, second-degree murder, and be part of that family on other crimes, and have that individual back on the street within 24, 48 hours, potentially and historically committing another crime, and or fleeing and not being able to track them down and bring justice. And so, and then on top of that, the financial side of it, those monies are used in the courts to help pay the overhead in the courts. And we're going to lose that income. And where's that going to come? Our local counties and cities going to have to increase property taxes to cover those expenses that are lost. So, there's little things. Trespassing, it's no longer would be not a crime. They can ticket them, but they cannot force people off your property. Now, unless they're hostile, but that's a concern. That somebody could be a squatter in your garage or whatever, and you've got to go through eviction processes and everything else to get them out of your garage. And that's just not right. We're really giving the criminals more rights than we are the victims. So that's one of the things. But look at the gun crime. It's on the increase. Myself and some others went out to Washington, D.C. looking for some help from the federal government. We talked to 4 senators, U.S. senators, 2 from the Iowa side, 2 from the Illinois side, working on trying to get more resources, federal resources, in the Quad Cities to help fight gun crime. And once again, we did that unified. We did it between Iowa and Illinois. We did it between cities and everything else. We went as a collaborative group. And that's one thing I want to also take to Springfield is that collaborative, work together attitude. But back to the crime, we need to work on bringing crime back down. We had a good trend going, and this last year or so, it's going up, and I don't see any relief with that with these new laws.
And just to be clear for viewers, the Safety Act does not get rid of all cash bail for every single criminal.
It does not. The judge has some flexibility, but less than he had before, or she had before. And so there can be some cash bails, depending on the type of crime, depending on the background of the individual. There is some potential there that still could be a cash bail, or no bail at all, depending on the issue. But unfortunately, a lot of them, that could be the case because they're, once again, looking at keeping the jails empty, and they're worried about those expenses there.
I want to move on to workers' rights, which is one of the biggest issues on the ballot in Illinois this year. You have the Workers' Right Amendment, and labor groups support it, business groups oppose it. Where do you fall on this issue?
You know, I am pro-union. I have no problem with unions and organization and businesses and everything else. But I think that it should be between the employer and the employees on that situation. It should not be automatic that it has to be an opportunity to organize. Also, being in the Constitution makes it permanent for the most part. You don't see too many things coming out of the Constitution. And I don't think it's fair to hand tie future legislators on decisions that are making. The economy changes, things happen in life, the culture changes, and when we put something, quote, that permanent in the Constitution, it makes it very difficult to adjust the culture that you need to at that time. Whether it could be as short as 5 years from now, but it could be 50 years from now. Things change and we can't predict that. And so I don't think that it should be in there as a permanent issue. I'm okay with organizing. If 50% of the employees sign an agreement and they want to try to organize, more power to them. I think that they have that right, and the company has a right to be able to either accept that or put their arguments up and whether it should be organized or not. So I'm very supportive of the unions and organized labor, and because I think they serve a great purpose in a lot of areas, but just not in the Constitution.
I want to turn to the economy. One of the largest issues facing Americans, and certainly people here in Illinois, is inflation. What can you do as a state senator to help bring down inflation in the 36th district?
You know, one would be to help businesses lower their cost of doing business. That would, once again, not just increase, people say, oh, it just increases their profit. No, a lot of them, it's very competitive, it's a free market, but we as a state add too many regulations to businesses in doing business. And so I think the state needs to get out of the way, so to speak, in a more broad term, and help businesses grow and grow efficiently so they can lower costs. Once again, they also income tax. We keep on increasing or wanting to increase income tax for businesses. And all they do is they're going to pass that cost on to their products and to the consumer, which causes inflation. And so we need to actually reduce the income tax base and on that part of it, so they can pass that on to the consumer to save that money. So that's one way the state can do it. Also reducing the sales taxes on issues. People always say then, where are you going to make up that lost income? And once again, long term, you make up that lost income on new businesses coming to town, the growth of existing businesses. They in turn are going to be paying more into the state, just as a percentage it'll be less. And that's where we need to grow, is in growing businesses, adding more people to into our population into the state to help the economy grow. And I believe that will lower costs. A lot of it's also federal driven. Once again, we see where OPEC is cutting back on the release of oil and et cetera. And so a lot of that is inflation and cost of living is going up. It's on the federal side, but the state can absolutely help it and work together with the businesses to lower those costs.
What sort of businesses or industries would you like to see brought into this district?
That's in this district. Seems to be a lot farming, agriculture, and so we can bring things related to that. Obviously, we already have John Deere here as far as that part goes. But, I visited Gray Manufacturing the other day, and I visited Cornhead's couple weeks ago, and those are ancillary businesses to the agriculture business that we can continue to draw those businesses in because their customers are right here. And so it's a very efficient way to go. So that's a very, I think, a positive way we can work on growing our type of business we can bring in. The other is light manufacturing and warehousing. We're in the hub of the intersections of 74 and 80 and going east and west and north and south. So it's really an ideal place for trucking and rail to be. And so warehousing, logistically, warehousing and light manufacturers, it's an ideal spot for them in this area. So I would like to increase that. People talk about technology and microchips and everything else, and that's fine. And then those things are growing. We need to make more in the United States. But I'm not sure whether this area will draw that or not. It may. But so it's light manufacturing, warehousing, logistics, agricultural related type of issues.
Healthcare is top of mind for lots of voters this election cycle. What could you do to help make healthcare more affordable and more accessible for people in the Illinois 36th district?
You know, I think that one thing that can make it more affordable, and it's kind of a domino effect, but if we put limits on dollars in lawsuits for malpractice, for doctors or pharmaceuticals and that sort of thing, to lower their malpractice insurance, because that's what gets passed on to the consumer also. And so that is one I think that we can work on, is reform on insurance claims with malpractice. The other is duplication of services. You know, we need to work on a master database, so to speak, in the systems work. The Unity Point system or Iowa Health Systems and the Genesis have in their systems work well together in data, but we need to share it worldwide almost. And so if I have an x-ray for an issue at this one doctor, and then I go to the next doctor, and he says, oh, we can do the x-rays. Well, why can't we share that information? You're adding expense to this problem. And they, once again, for liability issues, they say, no, we have to do it, so it's our machine, and we look at it, and we might do it differently. That just drives cost up, the duplications of functions that we have to try to treat somebody. So I think that's another area that's a problem. Continue to open up insurance companies. The one size fits all. I don't believe in one company or the state to being involved in the healthcare insurance. I think that as more healthcare insurance carriers we can have, the better. It's more competitive, and that's the free market. So I think that'll help drive down costs.
It's not any surprise to viewers, especially if you're watching this channel or anywhere in the Quad Cities, that there have been a lot of attack ads in this particular race. Mm-hmm. Is there anything that you've seen in an attack ad against you that you would like to clarify or claim to be false?
Interesting you bring this up. But yes, the one is I have never voted for a tax increase. The City Council has voted for some increases early on, back in 2017 and 18. For property taxes, but I did not. The mayor only votes when there's a tie. And so to tag that on to me specifically, I think is unfair. To the council, and yes, I was mayor, and if you want to call it the leader of it, and that's where the buck stops is with the leader, that's fine, I guess you could do that. But there's also more behind those stories than what is being told also, is that the city's debt amount went up dramatically years before that. It better than doubled. It almost tripled in debt that the city had. And that council at that time did not raise any property taxes for 6 years. And you had inflation, then you had that additional debt that you got to pay off. And so at some point you've got to catch up. And so there is some justifications for increasing at that point, is that we have to pay the bills. And so the money the city had spent, it did not bring in new revenue. And it's okay to go bond and spend some money if you're going to turn around and get a return on that investment. What they did not. And I'm not blaming them for what they tried to invest in, but it didn't work. And so we needed to cover those expenses. So they did raise it, but I don't know if it's fair to tag it specifically on me as a Thoms tax. The other is tried to sell the water and sewer. I did not try to sell the water and sewer, but as most business people, if you've been in business, you know you have to look at all different alternatives of projects and things to do and ways to process things. And so it was fair for the city to take a look at, if we were to sell it, what is it worth? What would we get out of it? What would we lose out of it? And there's other avenues too, whether to keep it, to invest more money in it. And so we were looking at that, strictly just looking at what opportunities and options the city had, not going on the mission to sell it. And so I think that's misleading also, is that any smart legislators in Springfield, I'm hoping the legislators take a look at things before they make decisions and change laws, that they look at all different options. And I'm assuming they will and do. And so that's all the city was doing, is just looking and investigating. Not to belabor that, but it just, it's fair to say. Some cities have found it financially advisable to do. We, interesting enough, when Lane Evans was in office at U.S. Congress, the federal government sued the city of Rock Island for its operations of water and sewer. And the city of Rock Island was forced to spend $72 million in upgrading and changing their systems with the water and sewer. $72 million over a 10-year period the city had to spend. And so you've got to increase some fees to cover that. That's a large expenditure for the size town we are. Our water filtration plant was 109 years old. We built a new one for $20 million. That has to be paid for. So whether private individuals or private company owns it, or whether the city owns it, investments need to be made. And to make those investments, you got to pay for the financing those interest rates and of such. And so that's where the justification is. Not that it's pleasant, but those need to be made at time to time. We are still one of the lowest in the Quad City as far as water and sewer rates. So we've been able to maintain and keep it as competitive and low as we can for the citizens of Rock Island. So I think that's been unjustified, that I was trying to sell it. It was not. I'm trying to think of some of the other ones: taxes, water and sewer. Trying to remember the other tax. I tried to ignore it. Oh, chasing businesses out of town. They had an advertisement chasing small business out of town. I would go on record that I probably have brought in and helped facilitate more small businesses getting started than most. I've been personally heavily involved in economic development in the city of Rock Island. The staff is pleasant to work with. They're great individuals in the city of Rock Island. And we've made great strides in adding new small businesses to the city. To that point, this last year, we ended up with a $1.7 million surplus in revenue because we brought new businesses in town. We did it without raising taxes. We did not raise taxes for the last several years, any tax, property tax. And so you can do it. You can bring more revenue in without raising taxes if you work on the economic development. We've grown a lot of businesses in the city of Rock Island, brought some new ones in, and there's 5 buildings under construction as we speak right now in the city of Rock Island. All have impact agreements, 100% union, prevailing wage, and that's what it's about, is growing that economy. So I think that some of those commercials have been a little misleading.
Well, let's talk about your role as mayor. If you win this election and you head down to Springfield, will you continue your duties as mayor of Rock Island?
I don't know. We'll weigh that situation after the election. There's a number of cities and people that are doing it currently. There have been over the years. And so it is doable. Really, if you take a look at, most legislators have I'll call it a second job or two roles. Senator Neil Anderson's a firefighter. Representative Mike Halpin's an attorney. So they all have a second job besides being legislator. And so you could view the mayor as the same thing, as you have mayors one and a state senator as the second. And so it's legally an option, but we'll see if time-wise, if that makes sense after the election.
Wrapping up, let's say things do not go your way on November 8th. Will you support your opponent and this democratic process?
Sure, absolutely. No, we need to do that. We need to work together. I've been about that throughout my whole campaign, is being bipartisan, working across the aisle, and not just politically, but with anybody. We need to work together and collaborative. Boy, if there's any theme that I've had as mayor, has been collaborative with the private and public sector, and public, doing business with the Arsenal, doing business with City Moline, and collaborating together there, or private organizations like DARI, et cetera. And so why wouldn't I do that? And it would support anybody to work together, whether you win or lose. We need to be here for the citizens. And that's what sometimes gets forgotten, is we're not running for these positions for just individually, for our own self needs. We're here to be a public servant to the citizens. And so whether you're Republican, Democrat, Independent, makes no difference. We've got to do what's best for the community, the district that we're in, and the state of Illinois to grow.